Welcome everyone. I'm the man in the background here. Hi everybody. If you don't know me, I know most of you. My name is Josh Lockwood. I'm the proud regional CEO for the American Red Cross in Greater New York. Red Cross Strong here in the New York City area, where we respond to about 2,500 disasters a year and do a lot of incredible work. As you all know, our mission here as Red Cross volunteers is to alleviate suffering and save lives. We do that with big hearts every single day. Some fun facts: you might not know that 25% of our workforce, which is 6,000 volunteers here in Greater New York, are under 25 years old. And on a hot day like today, we need those folks to go up many large buildings to help people at their most desperate moments. But something that really inspires our volunteers is that we are not just New York City or in the United States. We're part of a global movement, and we are so honored here today to have the inspirational president of the International Federation of the Red Cross here, Francesco Rocca. Welcome. And we have other amazing panelists that we'll introduce. I also want to point out Richard Blewett, who stepped out, who's now waving, who's the IFRC delegate to the UN, a great friend of ours here and is often in these halls in the chapter. I also want to point out some special supporters. We have 4 board members here who are clustered together that support the Red Cross mission, not just as volunteers getting their hands dirty, but also giving generously to the mission. You guys can raise your hands. We appreciate it, board members. Thank you. Very humble as well. Thank you to all. So this topic today is particularly resonant for us. Many of us on the Red Cross team here in New York City got a call at about starting at 8 p.m. and going to 1 a.m. on Saturday night. You may be aware that there was a blackout between 42nd and 70th Streets on the west side. One of the biggest challenges in emergency management is contemplating a long-lasting blackout in New York City, where you have millions of people who can quickly run out of food and water, who need medical supplies, who are stuck in subways and elevators. So luckily, this event only lasted a few hours. It did lead to more fires that the Red Cross responded to because people were using candles as lights, which is very common in a blackout. But it underscored the facts that in these times we live in, climate change and heating global cities, overheated global cities, is an incredible challenge to our mission and something we practice for and train for every single day. So we're thrilled to have this panel here today to enlighten us on this topic. We have one of our most beloved volunteers here, Christophe Lobry-Boulanger. Christophe is going to introduce the panel and walk us through this exciting topic. Christophe.
Josh, thank you very much, and thank you also for the invitation to have our president, Francesco Rocca, to speak while he's in New York and present the heatwave guide, which he just presented at the UN. He just came from the UN headquarters, and if you were to watch UN TV a few hours ago, he was there presenting the guide, which he will share with you as well today. I will say a few words about Francesco, our president, and then introduce the various panelists. So, our president, Francesco Rocca, has enjoyed a long and distinguished career with the Italian Red Cross, first as its head of emergency operations in 2008, and its extraordinary commissioner from 2009 to 2013, before being appointed national president from 2013 to 2017, and later national president of the Italian Red Cross Association. Now, with the IFRC, with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, his service has been equally distinguished. He has served as a vice president for Europe from 2013 to 2017, and actually when I served in Budapest, he was my vice president. And then later on, of course, he moved on to higher skies, where he was the Italian Red Cross representative on the IFRC governing board from 2009 to 2013. Of course, he organized a successful 9th European Conference of the Red Cross and Red Crescent in Florence, Italy, in his own country in 2014, and then the high-level movement cooperation meeting on the humanitarian situation in the Mediterranean in Rome a few years later in 2011. As a lawyer by profession, Mr. Rocca spent the 90s fighting organized crime in Italy before moving into the health sector in 2003 as the general director of St. Andreas Hospital in Rome. He holds a degree in law from La Pienza University and a professional qualification in health management from Italy's Public Administration Superior School. President Rocca will be the first one to speak, and he will be followed by the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, first with Julie Arrighi, who is the director. Let me see. Julie is the climate advisor for the American Red Cross and urban manager and ICRC partnership lead at the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center. Roop, who is actually behind this guideline, she will present later on, will provide an introduction to the Red Cross Red Crescent Heatwave Guide for cities. And then we move on to the New York side of the subject matter with Kizzy Guzman. And Kizzy is the Deputy Director for New York City's Mayor's Office on Resiliency. And she will be followed by Chris Pagnotta. Chris is the Advanced Warming Cooling Center Program Manager for New York City Emergency Management. Mr. President, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Please, thank you, Josh, for your kind words. Good afternoon. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. It's always an emotion when I have the opportunity to speak with the volunteers in a local branch, even if it's an important one, while I'm here in New York, in the Greater New York chapter. Just being back from the Solferino event, on which I met some of your colleagues. I know that there was a delegation and I hope that next year will be a bigger one, because we had a wonderful time together, reminding to all of us our origin, why we decide to serve humanity, why we decide to serve the most vulnerable, and creating inspiration for those women. I always joke about the fact, that Henri Dunant is our founder, but sometimes I think that as all the people who was able to transform the idea of the humanitarianism, he had also maybe a big ego, because the real person who stated Tutti Fratelli, we are all brothers, were the women of Solferino. He was inspired by these women, so courageous, so brave, that in this very moment of war, of conflict, they found the courage to say to the people living with them in this little village in Italy with few inhabitants, say Tutti Fratelli. And why? Because maybe someone was shouting at them, saying, why you are taking care of the enemy? Why you are taking care? And so thanks to these women, he found the inspiration, and he was so brave to call the governments and to create the ICRC and to make the most powerful countries at that time to sign the Geneva Convention. And from that moment on, our history began. But coming from this and coming from a battlefield where we born, now why we are here and why together in these days I'm here to discuss the climate change. Why the climate change is related to the battlefield? Because during the years we know which are the battlefield, which are the new fights that not only the country but every individual is forced to fight to survive. And the climate change, our volunteers and even you responding to many crises and many disasters, you perfectly know how this is affecting the life and the lives of the hidden one, the most vulnerable. And this is why it's so important for us to discuss about climate change. This is why it's so important to have experts like Julie that you are going to listen, and the other colleagues from our our climate center of the Red Cross to listen from them why it's so important for our life and why it's so important for the most vulnerable that we do something more. And we advocate, we call to our governments to do more, to avoid that this reality, which is also an emergency, is also sometimes denied. And this is something extremely important, and we want to use the occasion as the high-level meeting in the UN, even to make our voice and the voice of our volunteers on the forefront to be heard, because our volunteers are really on the forefront in some places on which they are really living the concrete consequences. Maybe here in the Western world, in US or in Europe, we are not perceiving it. It's like the boiled frog, you know, the story of the boiled frog that slowly perceived that the water is becoming hot and then is going to die. But in other countries, in other parts of the world, they are living the consequences on a daily basis. When you will be able, try now with the social media, you can be connected to whoever you want. Use the social media to be connected with the volunteers of the Red Cross in the Pacific Island, for example, watching their islands disappearing and living the consequences of these wonderful places disappearing day by day. Or talk with the colleagues in St. Lucia or other place, wonderful place that we know only for holidays, but the people living there is living the consequences of the climate change. UN warned us that now more than one disaster every week is striking because the climate change. And there is also another silent killer, which in a few seconds you will listen more by our colleagues. Then in cities like New York, or my one, which is Rome, is a silent killer, but often hitting the most vulnerable, the elderly, the very young people, and those who are living with other pathologies, and they are really affected by these heat waves that are increasing and increasing and increasing, and there is no plan in a vast part of the cities in the world to mitigate or reduce the consequences of the heat waves. And this is the reason why we decided to provide these very simple guidelines. Maybe I don't know if we brought with us or not some copies, maybe few, but we can also on the website you will find it of the federation. Just very simple, that could be understood even by the politicians. So this is very this was our first concern, to be really direct and make that no one can justify that this is very technical, because sometimes even for CPR they think that it's only for the medical doctor, that is not for the very simple people. And again, this is the same for these guidelines. With the very simple actions, you can make the difference in saving life of the people. And this is why we exist. And this is why we have concern for these kind of consequences. So this is the decision that I fully endorse of our climate center, which is doing a great job, working with several institutions to provide technical data, and then to transform this technical data in very simple info to save lives, or to provide what we call now resilience in the communities to mitigate the consequences of the disaster. So this is the reason why we are here. I don't want to steal time to our colleagues at their interesting presentation. Of course, I'm at your full disposal at the end of the presentation if there are questions about the role of the Federation in supporting the national societies on these new challenge that we heard. As a president of the Federation, I put the climate change at the top of our agenda. You know how close to my heart is also migration and other aspects of our daily life that is affecting the life of people that is fleeing violence. But many are fleeing because the consequences of the climate change, because maybe there are desertification in their own country, they don't find anything to feed their own sons, their own family. So there are several aspects of our life that are affected by the climate change. So it's time for us to be more aware, to better advocate. So thank you very much again. I think it's time for for Julie Arrighi, which is working with the American Red Cross, but is very cooperative with the Climate Center, which I'm very proud. She's also Arrighi. So this morning I asked her. She is also originally from Italy, from the Lake of Como. So this is a reason more to be proud of. But it's very easy here in US to find people that is coming from Italy. So it's an easy task, but sincerely thank you for having found the time to be more acquainted, more informed about this challenge, because then it's up to us, it's up to every one of us then to spread the message. And also let me take the occasion to thank the office of the mayor. It's not easy. No, sometimes they feel that they have other more important business to attend and not to be present so I'm really grateful, because it's important to have this kind of connection. I know that here in New York this is a work that made on a daily basis on several aspects of the life of this very complicated city, but I want to thank the mayor for the big work that he is doing, especially in connection with our branch of the Red Cross. So thank you to all, and then please, Julie, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to have such a nice opportunity to come together and talk about such an important topic, not only heat risks, but climate risks more generally. My colleague Roop will explain the heat wave guide and some of the aspects on heat that we've been talking about today. So to preface that, I'm just going to give a broad overview of some of the work that happens in the movement when it comes to climate change more generally. So first, why climate? We know that risks are on the rise, and our volunteers around the world are on the front lines of witnessing that every single day, as President Rocca has already said. Hazards becoming more intense and more frequent in some places and will be in the future in other places. And so it's fundamental to the humanitarian mission of the Red Cross, Red Crescent, to be able to respond to these rising risks, to ensure that those who are most vulnerable to them have the ability to adapt and cope and not be impacted by disasters. So within the Red Cross, Red Crescent global network, there is something called the Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Center, which may be new to most of you. This is a technical reference center. It has a team of roughly 40 people who are spread all over the world. And this center provides the technical support to the system, national societies in the system, national branch level, etc., on how to operationally consider climate risks in their day-to-day work. And so I'll speak a tiny little bit about that and what the center is doing, and then hand over to Ruth, but just to give that background. So the Climate Center was founded in 2002 with a mandate to support the Red Cross, Red Crescent system and humanitarian partners to raise this issue of adaptation to climate change. Last year we supported over 70 national societies, so it's not the entire network, but it's a large percentage of them. The Climate Center focuses on 3 key areas. We do work on policy, whether it's at a city level, a national level, or a global level. The Climate Center also does work on research, collaborating with universities to help improve the evidence base that the Red Cross uses to take action. And then we do a lot of technical support to national societies on the operational side of things. And we try as best as possible to integrate these. So I'm going to give a couple of quick examples. One of the ones that is growing quite large at the moment is something called forecast-based financing. Essentially, this is looking at how do we better use forecast information that a hazard is coming. Actually, the American Red Cross has been doing this for a while with hurricanes, for example. This is not common across the movement, so the American Red Cross is a good example of this. But it's the basic ideas of, for example, if you have a hurricane coming into a location, to decide in advance when you're going to move volunteers to that location, to move resources to that location, etc., or even to do emergency preparedness measures to help prevent the impacts. So this is something that the wider system is now working to build up, and the Red Cross is helping to support that. There are many involved. It's in quite a few countries. And so This includes not only the operational aspect, but also some policy aspects, raising the importance of this with national governments so that humanitarian financing can be released ahead of time is the long-term vision. Already within the Red Cross, Red Crescent system in Geneva, there is a fund that releases funds ahead of time to help national societies fund these movements, especially those that don't have as large of a resource base to draw from. And then, of course, the research aspect of this, knowing do you trigger these movement of resources with this forecast or that forecast? Because none of them are guaranteed, and so what are the risks you're willing to take, and sort of building an evidence base around that. That's one example. Some of the other things that we've been doing, we're working now more and more on urban adaptation. We know that half of the world lives in cities, 2/3 of the world will live in cities by 2050 throughout sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia. Cities are growing very rapidly. In Asia, it's mixed. In some cases, cities are already quite large, of course. So working with city partners to think about how to include climate risks in the urban plans as the city infrastructure is growing. Obviously, as a Red Cross, we're not doing infrastructure work, but helping to provide the right connections to the right evidence base so that those city authorities can, especially when they have limited resources, access the information they need to make the decisions that they need to take to prevent future climate risks, for example. Some of the heat work, which Roop will get into as well, is another important part of that. And a really exciting area of work that is still growing is also looking at urban small businesses. What are the climate information that small businesses can use to prevent themselves from being impacted by disasters? Because we know if the business community can recover quickly after a disaster or not be impacted in the first place, that the wider community also will recover because people will continue to have jobs, they continue to have income, and they can also then recover at home. So that's a newer area of work, and that piece of work is in particular in collaboration with the American Red Cross International Services team as well, so that's a pretty exciting one. In terms of training resources, we have actually quite a lot that's available, which may be of interest to all of you as well. We've just launched something new, which is called the Climate Training Kit. We had an older version, the new version just launched a couple of weeks ago. It has a lot of modules in it that start from the very basics, why is climate relevant to the Red Cross, Red Crescent, and go into the very detailed. How you engage with policy at a national level, for example. So there's a huge spectrum there. But that may be a nice resource to draw from if you're interested to dig more into what the Red Cross Red Crescent is doing globally, because it gives a lot of examples, it gives a lot of recommendations. I guess the last thing I could say is that we also try to do some sort of innovative communication things. So we do a lot of work on experiential games. So for some of the complex issues that are difficult to share and explain in this sort of a setting, we have games that help take people through these different mechanisms and sort of experience in a rapid way some of the decisions and the trade-offs that are made that can then help inform decision making. We've been working more on art installations, for example, as a different way to tap into raising the importance of of climate risks in general. Urban was a slip, but cuts across all of our work. So there's a lot of work that's going on, and happy to explain more about what the Climate Center is doing and the relationship between the Climate Center and American Red Cross if that's of interest. But I want to also hand over to Roop to share a bit about the Heatwave Guide.
Great, thank you, Julie. Hi, everyone. So before I talk about this Heatwave Guide, which was launched this morning by the President at the UN, how many of you have looked at the forecast for New York for the rest of the week? Any of you? So what did you see? It's going to be hot, yeah. So actually, we're potentially expecting it to be, the forecast currently says 99 degrees on Sunday, which is very hot. In New York, a heat wave is defined as 3 consecutive days over 90 degrees. So heat waves are affecting your lives, clearly. So I can be up here and talk about why heat waves are an important risk, but the fact that you are, in the next couple days, going to be experiencing it is really important, right? Because it's a risk that we're seeing right now in the Northern Hemisphere here in New York, but also around the world. So I thought I could test your knowledge a little bit to kick off. So in the past 10 years, we've seen deadly heat waves around the world. In 1995, maybe some of you will remember, in Chicago, there was a deadly heat wave. Does anyone want to guess how many people died during that heat wave? 15,000. Other guesses? That's a little high. That's very close. So over 700 people died during that heat wave. What about in Europe in 2003? There was a Europe-wide heat wave. This is one of the worst heat waves that we've seen in recorded history in Europe, at least in recent history. Any guesses?
30,000.
30,000? You back there? 3,500. So that's a little low. So actually it was over 70,000 deaths.
Wow.
And that's surprising, right? It's 70,000 deaths, but oftentimes we don't realize that heat waves can be such a killer because we don't see heat waves like we would see like a flood or an extreme rainfall event or a hurricane. We can't see those same images on TVs. We don't see, we essentially don't see heat waves the same way, but they are an extremely important climate risk, and also one of the things that we know most clearly about climate change, so how risks are changing. We know that heat is increasing all across the world. So that's why we came together to write the Heat Wave Guide for Cities. So this is a guide that was written with and for city managers, and essentially it's very practical, as the president mentioned. It can be read by anyone, and it goes through what are heat wave risks, how are heat wave risks changing. It also talks about what can you do, like practically, before a heat wave to prepare. What can you do during a heat wave in terms of communicating out risks to people? How can you visit people in their homes, especially if they're elderly or at high risk? And also, what do you do after a heat wave? So how do you do an after-action review to review how your heat wave plan worked if you do have one in place? What else do I want to talk about? So the other thing that's really important for us to mention in terms of heat waves is that we expect them to get worse in the future, but we're already starting to see the risk of heat waves increase. So how many of you heard about the heat wave in Europe last week? Some of you. So there was actually a study that came out that week that said climate change made that heat wave at least 5 times worse than it would have been in a climate without climate change. So we're clearly already seeing that our climate has changed and the risks are increasing. So in addition to sort of heat wave planning around the heat wave, there's also information in this guide about what should we be doing as a city on a longer term timescale. So for example, green spaces, painting your roofs white, amongst other things. And I'm sure New York City will talk more about that. And I guess one other thing to mention is that we have a bunch of case studies from cities around the world, including from New York City. So the example from New York City talks about how New York has a panel on climate change where you're starting to understand how are risks changing in this city in particular, and then coming up with heat wave plans, a cool neighborhoods plan, amongst other things, to sort of tackle those risks. Cities around the world, especially cities where you don't have as much forecasting capabilities, perhaps they're growing cities, don't necessarily know what the heat wave risks are, or perhaps they haven't had the heat wave risks in the past. So this guide is sort of also for those sorts of cities to learn from places like New York, to learn from places that already have heat wave plans in place. I guess I'll end there and pass it off to my colleagues in New York from the city.
Okay, thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you very much, Julie. We're going to pass on to the city, and with Rizy Guzman from the Mayor's Office of Resiliency. She's the Deputy Director, and I will actually, this is your presentation, is it? That's the other one then, okay. This one?
Yes.
Okay. If I can. All right. Oh, Excuse me. Desiree? I can pick it up, but it doesn't stay on my screen.
You just have to.
This one there.
This one?
The Explorer, yeah.
So it should be fine.
It's probably gonna be down now.
Same.
Are we good? Do you have?
Will I be covering over your shoulders too?
It's quite right. Or just let me know when. Okay, here.
Why don't we trade?
Very good.
Thanks.
It's much better.
Hi everybody, thank you for having me. My name is Kizzy, Charles Guzman from the New York City Mayor's Office of Resiliency. I'm going to do the setting so that I don't block the screen since this is already a little small. Let me get familiar with this mouse and see what it's doing. What is it doing? Can you see that? We'll do it. Okay. Nope, it's not working that way. It's not working. So it's not the mouse.
No. I think it's not opening the right version.
This is a PDF, so it should just be able
just work,
to.
right?
Oh yeah, there we go.
Thank you.
Yep, I
Okay.
think so. Thank you. The machine is overheated. Look at that. Okay, so again, the Mayor's Office of Resiliency was created after Hurricane Sandy to coordinate the recovery process right after that disaster. But that was a few years ago, and we have evolved a lot, and we've done a lot of thinking about long-term planning for resiliency and for adaptation needs of New York City, and we have expanded past just the risk of coastal flooding and hurricanes to looking at a variety of other climate risks. So our office is actually a policy shop. We use the New York City Panel on Climate Change's data, right? So our best available climate science that is downscale for New York City. And we use that information to develop policies and programs to inform our capital investments, to bring together different partners in order to do this long-term strategy for New York. And innovation is the key there, right? Because we have been for many years focused on sustainability, and so there's a lot there that we've done in terms of mitigating greenhouse gas emissions and trying to mitigate the effects of climate change. But at this stage, as you have heard, with the effects that we're experiencing today, it is clear that we also need to prepare for adapting, right? And for the things that we know that even if we all stop polluting the earth and stop generating all the greenhouse gases, we still need a way to live in the environment that we have. So again, here are some of the New York City climate hazards that our office looks at and that city government is kind of focused around, including our colleagues at the New York City Emergency Management Office. So everything from coastal storms and sea level rise through precipitation and extreme temperatures. So it's not just heat, but also cold. And then groundwater table rise. So again, for a while, we have not just been planning and preparing for storms. The New York City Panel on Climate Change is projecting that our days over 90 degrees will only get more frequent. That will triple, in fact, by the 2050s. We expect heat waves themselves to get more frequent, more intense, and also longer in duration. So we're talking by 2050s, an experience of summer as if we lived in Birmingham, Alabama. So I don't know if you've ever been there, but think of it as a lot hotter and wetter as well. And as you heard, we care about this hazard because heat is actually the most fatal on average of all extreme weather events in New York City, and this is true in the US. So this is hard to see, but the only thing that I want you to take away from this is that here on the left side in red, you see US fatalities by hazard, and that is heat compared to hurricanes. So again, just to give you a sense of scale, Hurricane Sandy claimed the lives of 44 New Yorkers, and it cost the city and the federal government to mobilize $22 billion in funding to help with that recovery. Meanwhile, we do face, as a country, many, many more fatalities related to heat. But as you heard, President Rocca mentioned, it is a silent killer. We don't see them. People are baking in their apartments, in their homes, in their places of work, and the places of worship. And here I have a list of the major heat waves that Rube was mentioning earlier, and I just wanted to give you just a quick sense of the scale of this problem, right? So from 1995 Chicago, Midwest, to just last year in Japan, not only did we see 110 deaths more or less, but we also saw a significant number of people hospitalized. So think about that. The numbers may seem small to you in terms of the deaths, but when you consider that these are our average numbers for every summer, right? I'll tell you more about New York City in a moment, then you realize how problematic this is and how imperative it is that we prepare as government, but also that we count on your help, right, as humans to help keep each other safe. So I am on this train because the challenge about this is that heat exposure is deadly, but it's also preventable. So what really irritates me is that every single one of those deaths you saw up there was preventable, was 100% preventable. It turns out that indoor temperatures can be up to 20 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than outside, right? So imagine that. We talked about this weekend, it'll be 99 degrees, the heat index will put it above 100, but inside apartments, it can be 20 degrees hotter than that if you don't have air conditioning. So in New York City, actually, heat mortality rates are strongly associated with poverty and with poor housing quality. And that would make sense to you in a moment, right? And that's because this number is wrong up here. The 75% prevalence on residential air conditioning in New York City is outdated. By now, the rate is about 88%, which is still not super high. Nationally, we have about a 90% rate. Let me say something else about that for a second. Even though that seems like a high rate, that rate is not uniform across the city, and certainly not across different neighborhoods. So we have neighborhoods in the city where you have over 95% prevalence, meaning most people have an AC because they are wealthier. They can run an air conditioner. In some neighborhoods, you have only a 70% penetration of AC. And even when people have an air conditioner, then they have a lot of concerns about running it. So they don't use it. And the city has done a lot of surveys. We've published those results. They're available online for free, so that you can see that actually not only are we facing this significant climate risk, but also New Yorkers, so many of us are immigrants. So many of us come from far away places that are much warmer than the Northeast. So in fact, we don't perceive heat risk to be a real problem. We think of air conditioning as a luxury. If you ever are that unlucky to read any newspaper article about providing air conditioner for poor people in this city, you will also be subjected to reading a bazillion super racist, super classist comments by everyone who thinks that we should not subsidize this life-saving piece of equipment for poor people because it is considered to be a luxury and because most people don't see it as a life-saving tool, right? So in New York, on average, every summer, we see about 450 heat-related emergency department visits. That's not a small number. And we see about 150 of those people be hospitalized for heat illness. And we get an average of 13 heat stroke deaths. So those are the deaths that the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner says this was directly related to heat. This was heat stroke. But on top of that, we see about 115 deaths that are excess deaths. And so what that means is that you had an underlying health condition that was made worse because of extreme heat. So cardiovascular disease, respiratory illness, diabetes, obesity, that kind of thing, right? So this is not a small problem for New York. And as I mentioned to you before, the risks vary by neighborhood. So if those of you in the back are having a hard time seeing this, but I'll explain. Oh, your battery is running low. It is time to plug our PC. Who's gonna save us here? We need a plug. Okay, so I'll continue for the sake of time. So in red, you see the neighborhoods of the city that have the highest heat vulnerability. And in yellow, you see the places that have the lowest heat vulnerability. This map is available online. If you just Google cool neighborhoods New York City, you will find all of this information there. The reason this matters, this map, by the way, was put together by the city's health department in partnership with Columbia University researchers. And it basically describes heat risk as socioeconomic factors, but also physical factors. So these are places in the city that have lower vegetation cover, that have higher surface temperature, but also that have a higher proportion of poor people and a higher proportion of people of color, right? It turns out then that 3.4 million New Yorkers live in these census tracts that are considered high heat vulnerability. So this gave us a charge, and in 2017, my office developed and published the Cool Neighborhoods New York City strategy, which is the city's first ever plan to deal with heat-related deaths and heat-related illness, especially as the climate warms. What's innovative about Cool Neighborhoods is that it actually brings together a lot of health data alongside the climate data. So we're no longer using that silo of the environmental problem versus the health problem. This was put together by a variety of city agencies, including our Emergency Management Department, Department of Transportation, Department of Environmental Protection, everyone coming together to figure out how we can align the city to protect and prepare New Yorkers while we focus on vulnerable populations and underserved communities and communities where we have underinvested for decades. So I just want to very quickly, I'm going to wrap this up, just want to give you some few examples of where we are and what components of the plan are. But please note that, again, if you just Google that, you will find it. It is available. There's a lot of technical information in the report, but also a lot of useful tips. So this is a government plan. The first part of the strategy is actually an investment of over $100 million on tree planting. And we're doing those tree plantings specifically on the streets in the areas of the city that I showed you, the red areas, right, that have high heat vulnerability. And that's because, look, I'm sorry, some neighborhoods have a lot of trees and they're lovely. There's a lot of shade, people are playing outside, children are playing outside. Those are not the places that need my damn money, right? We need to instead focus on the areas of the city where you go an entire city block and you don't see a single point of shade. And so this is why people stay indoors even when it's dangerous for them to do so, because they're baking in their apartment, but they think that walking out to the cooling center is actually more exposure to that heat risk, right? They don't want to sit in a bus stop waiting for a bus in order to go to a cooling center that might be a couple of blocks away from their home, right? So the first chart here are some photos that are hard to see, but I'm just going to point up to the right, is that here's this New York City street on the left, and you see it's just sun. The street is baking. And just 5 years later, you can see that you see less sun. I know it's an unclear photo, but this is in the plan. Just what a difference it makes to just have some shade on the street. That said, it does take 100 years to grow a 100-year-old tree, right? So I can plant 1 million trees, and I'm very sorry, everybody thinks that we can solve the urban heat island problem by planting trees, and it could not be farther from the truth, because it will take a while for those trees to grow. So other strategies that we're putting in place include also strategically implementing our already existing Cool Roofs program to those neighborhoods that need it the most, because what we're trying to get at is clusters of roofs that are painted white. So I no longer want to see a dot here and a dot across the borough. That is not helping me, right? Instead, I want to see big clusters of roofs in the areas that are shaded red, right? So over 10 million square feet of white roofs have been coated to date. This is important because a white roof on the building helps reduce energy use, which means you have to use less air conditioning, which means that you're polluting less. If you ever have walked in front of an air conditioner, the outside part, you know it's blowing out hot air, right? That contributes to the urban heat island effect. So we want to be able to manage some of that and lower our emissions. And so in 2018, for example, so again, we released the plan in 2017, 73% of the cool roofs that we installed were in these high heat vulnerability areas. So we're pretty proud of about that. And if you're wondering what that looks like, here's a photo. Hard to see, but this is NYCEM housing. This is public housing. And the photo on the left, this is Brooklyn in Crown Heights, shows you before we coated it and after we coated it in 2018. And what you can see is that it already looks different, and this is the best we could do at this time with a Google map. But we are going systematically, approaching partners, supportive housing organizations, schools, houses of worship. Anyone that had a flat roof, the city coated them for free, even though the financial benefit of that coating goes to the building owner. But again, because the ship has sailed, and we can try to mitigate the effects of urban heat, but we're not going to stop them altogether. The fact is that we need to rely on you and on each other to keep people safe. So the one other thing that we know is that, again, New Yorkers are foreigners, New Yorkers are distrustful, New Yorkers do not want to hear from me as a government bureaucrat. They don't. They want to hear from neighbors. They want to hear from their clergy. They want to hear from their medical doctors, their nurses, right? They're the folks that bring together the social capital of the neighborhood. So what we did was develop a climate risk training, and we are going around and training home health aides, community health workers, the clergy, and so on and so forth, so that they can be partners with the city, and they can help to set up these buddy systems so that during a long period of a heat wave, they can be the ones calling on each other and checking on neighbors and encouraging people to take protective action. Does that make sense? So we have been taking our show on the road because we think it's important to serve this vulnerable population. Older adults are expected to, they're 11% of our population now. We expect a 40% increase in the coming years. Older adults are at higher risk of heat wave exposure and heat illness. So we want to get to the folks that are already visiting the homebound, already visiting those that have physical and mental health challenges. So that's a big part of our strategy. And then just to give a shout out to Chris, who will hit us up next. The city does have a wide network of cooling centers, so there was some signage improvements that the Office of Emergency Management has been undertaking over the last few years. The mayor's office, of course, continues doing a lot of advocacy at the state and federal level to make sure that our low-income home energy assistance program is not defunded. It was one of the programs that was on the chopping block every year with our new administration, so we want to make sure that the funding exists. That's funding that goes to provide heat support for heating assistance in the winter months and cooling assistance in the summer months, so it's very important for low-income New Yorkers. We recently enacted green roof legislation, so new buildings, renovations, any new roof needs to now have a green roof or solar or a cool roof. And we're also doing a significant amount of temperature monitoring, both indoor and outdoors, so that we can help build the evidence base and be able to better argue for the changes that will invariably be needed for our heat response plan citywide. So those are some of the things that the city's doing. I know that was really fast, sorry about that. Feel free to hit me up if you have questions about this later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kizzy, for this really eloquent and the Secretary General, in talking about the summit coming in September, the climate summit that you know about most likely at the UN, says don't bring speeches. Give us examples, policies, concrete examples. This is a series of concrete policy actions, early morning actions that the city is implementing. So thank you very much. Brilliant. Chris, you're on to basically present the New York City emergency management side of things, and I will.
Thank you very much. So again, my name is Chris Pagnotta. I work for New York City Emergency Management. We're the agency in New York City that's tasked with coordinating the city's response.
And is your again to keep it on.
Specifically about heat
yes,
today.
But it doesn't stay.
This is a great crowd to follow because we have some really evocative examples of what the dangers of extreme heat are, how it is the #1 weather-related killer in New York City. Usually my first job is to kind of scare everybody with those stats. That stuff's already been covered really well here today. So I can do a little bit less scaring and jump to, who are we actually most concerned about at times like these? And I say times like these because we did activate our heat emergency plan today in relation to the extreme heat. Our trigger in New York City for activating our plan is a heat index, which includes both the temperature and the humidity. It's that feels like temperature when they talk about it on the weather. It feels like it's this because of the humidity. But we activate at 95 degrees for 2 consecutive days or 100 degrees for 1 day. We're going to have 3 days this coming weekend, Friday through Sunday at 105. And that's where we're going to be activating. We're starting our activation tomorrow as we hit the mid-90s, and we'll be boiling through Sunday. And what it means to turn this plan on is a variety of things. And I say that we coordinate the city's emergency plan because it doesn't mean that we're in charge of the response or we do everything. We're working with a variety of different city agencies, nonprofit partners to respond to this hazard. National Weather Service is the ones that are kind of making the call as when we're going to hit the triggers. They have a variety of these heat products, the heat advisory, excessive heat watch, excessive heat warning. We're going to be hitting that excessive heat warning for this weekend and the heat advisory over the next couple of days. There are 3 strategies that we have. This is primarily a messaging emergency. We don't have, as Kizzy mentioned very eloquently, the penetration for air conditioning and air conditioning usage in the city that we would like. But we do have a wide variety of places that are air conditioned that people can avail themselves of and they can go to get respite. We run many of those facilities that we call cooling centers, and we're trying to encourage people to take an action through a public messaging. And that could be to turn on your own air conditioning if you have it, if you can afford to use it. It could be to go to some place, whether it's one of our locations or not, where you can get respite from the heat. Even a few hours a day of cooling can really start to recharge your body and get you through a longer stretch. So it doesn't mean necessarily you've got to be in a cool environment for 24 hours a day. It doesn't mean you have to have air conditioning running flat out, so you're living inside a meat locker for that period of time. You can run it up to about 80 degrees, recharge your body, drink some fluids, and really be able to get through it. And we're trying to convince people to take those actions. So we're reaching out through public messaging. This is going to be press releases, interviews, and press conferences. One of the advanced warning system is one of the ways that we reach out to our nonprofit partners who are serving people with disabilities and other access and functional needs, who are amongst the most vulnerable to heat. These are people who might be taking medications that impact their body's ability to regulate heat, that might be of advanced age, lower income, all factors that really increase the risk of succumbing to extreme heat, of having one of those hospital visits, of having mortality. And the way that we do this is that we're sending messaging out to these organizations, and we've got a list of about 1,900 of them. And there are 7,900 contacts with those different organizations, and we're giving them checklists for service providers. We're giving them the forecasts and a list of things that they can do to help better serve their clients. We don't know where every single person in the city is who is at this advanced risk of heat, but we do know and have great relationships with these organizations, and we can empower them to make good decisions to better serve their clients. They can take direct action, they can pass on the information, depending on what their clients need. And that's what we want to do. We want to really empower them. The cooling center program I alluded to before. The idea here is, to qualify, really all we really need is air conditioning, a safe place, and water. But the partners that we choose to run these cooling centers are places that are natural community gathering centers. So we're talking about libraries. Senior centers are fantastic. They're funded by the Department for the Aging in New York City. That's about half of our footprint right there. And they provide a lot of services that also really impact the ability to take care of these folks and help provide services that help reduce the risk beyond just the presence of air conditioning, which is super. We also have the Department of Youth and Community Development, who have a lot of recreational programs and night shift facilities. New York City Housing Authority itself runs a bunch of them. And we've got the Salvation Army Department of Parks and Rec that also runs the cooling centers for us. They'll be active throughout any one of these days where we activate our heat plant, so that's the next 5 days or so for us right now. But anytime we hit these triggers, we're going to ask these places to open up their doors in addition to what they normally do regularly. So a senior can go to a senior center any day, but on a day where we're in a heat emergency, anybody can go to one of these places and seek respite from the heat. You don't need ID, you don't need to be a citizen, you just show up and say, I'm hot, I'd like a drink of water and a place to chill out. And that's good enough for us. There are some other things that we do as well. I'm not going to go kind of into them quite as deeply, but we do things where we're working with our utility providers. We had a heat wave obviously this weekend, greatly concerning. You can't run air conditioning without power, and we try to support them in their ability to maintain the effectiveness of the grid. So they'll ask for appeals to customers to reduce their load, to run their air conditioning at a slightly higher temperature so that people have a chance to get cool, but they're not using quite so much power. They'll put an appeal out to city buildings to say, hey, if you've got backup generation for a period, can you run that backup generation and take your building off the grid so we can provide a little extra power to everybody else? And we help them get that word out. They'll do voltage reductions and things like that. There's a wide variety of things that they do. They're not typically things that the public sees every day, but that are happening kind of behind the scenes. Another one of our operational strategies is the spray cap program. I think of this as the Do the Right Thing program. If you've ever seen the movie Do the Right Thing, there's iconic scenes where there are kids playing in fire hydrants to cool off. It's like the urban sprinkler system. It's just this iconic vision of New York City. The unfortunate thing that when you do that is you lose pressure in the water system for those fire hydrants. The fire department doesn't like that. People whose houses on fire don't like that. We want to make sure we can fight fires in the city. But the nice thing that we can do is we provide this spray cap, which anybody can go to the local firehouse and say, hey, I want to open up a fire hydrant for my kids down the block. They'll give you the spray cap, they'll install it there. It functions as a sprinkler. It preserves pressure in the system so we can still fight fires, kids can cool down, everybody kind of wins. That's the kind of the bird's eye view of how we kind of get in the weeds for New York City for responding to extreme heat. It's all kind of very simple sounding. It's also a little bit more complicated on the back end as we scramble to get all these places activated and provide good information to the public. For anyone that's looking to find a cooling center or direct clients to a cooling center, the place to go is nyc.gov/bpheat. And when we're activated, and that'll be starting sometime tonight, we'll have a map on there. You can look at any specific address, see the cooling centers that are in the neighborhood, what their operating hours are, give them a call, confirm they're going to be open, and go there to avail yourself. The other thing I would recommend for folks in the crowd is if you work for the Red Cross or any kind of service provider organization, the advanced warning system, you can subscribe to get our alerts, our checklists, and all the best practices for helping your clients to beat the heat. Advanced warning system, NYCEM.
Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to Kizzy and our panelists. We went a little bit overboard over time, but we can still take some questions from the room, whether it is from the Climate Center side or the New York City side or our President Rocca. The floor is yours for about 5 to 10 minutes. Go ahead. Yes?
How many of
can you speak up a little bit so we can hear you?
how many of the city's cooling centers are between Powerball?
I don't have an exact number for you. For the most part, they're generally not. There are some that are. Some of these senior centers, some of these libraries are bigger facilities that have their own generation. But for the most part, they're running on the electric grid with Con Ed. We do have 579 of them, so as we lose some, and we do lose them throughout the season. When we activate this week, the number is probably going to be somewhere close to 500. We're aiming for both quality and quantity, so that if one goes out, in one spot, that we've got another one a couple blocks away.
Thank you. Josh.
First of all, thank you to the panel. New York City Emergency Management Mayor's Office are really just the best in the business, and we rely on these guys every day, so thank you. And to President Rocca and the Federation representatives, Red Cross volunteers are often action-oriented, and as you speak about this topic today and release the study, I'm curious what the call to action is for folks in the room and around the world who want to do something immediately when they realize how pressing this challenge is.
I think the first thing is to check on your neighbors. As you think about the people in your neighborhood, within your building, the people that are most at risk are the people who are elderly, low income, who are socially isolated, the person that you don't see very much, but that falls into those categories, doesn't get out very much, could really benefit on a knock on the door. And if they're not running their air conditioning, welcome them inside for an hour or so, remind them of the importance of air conditioning. Sometimes people get stuck in their ways, but when they see someone with care, they'll turn that air conditioning on. You can refer them to different service providing organizations if you can get them hooked up into a local senior center. The Meals on Wheels program is great because then we have people delivering food to the door, and those folks are keeping an eye on and advocating for people as well.
if to that I could just add quickly, just to highlight another population, which is, again, don't raise your hand, but how many of you have a friend, family member, or a neighbor that has a mental health condition that requires them to take medication, or high blood pressure, or diabetes? Like, most of us have a family member like that. So again, their body's ability to thermoregulate is often compromised. They might not feel hot even when they are dehydrating. So again, aside from the knock on the door to say, hey, you want to hang out for half an hour in my AC apartment, you might also just want to encourage them to just stay hydrated, which is by the time they realize that their skin is clammy, it is often too late, right? And so at that point, it's an emergency as opposed to something that was preventable. And so, part of this is really understanding the symptoms, but also understanding who's at risk. And everybody thinks that, sadly, because of the images we see on TV, we think that is little children or, playing outside, or that it is workers, doing construction work. But it's not. It's often people inside their homes who didn't know that they were supposed to stay hydrated, or who didn't see heat as a health risk.
Thank you, Kizzy.
I'm impressed by Kizzy's really very precise, and even in the presentation, the info that she's able to give, really know that this is exactly what they just said. I was thinking, Josh, that it's also time for us as a movement, our Red Cross Red Crescent movement, even to change a bit even the way we think. In many occasions, I use that. Sometimes we like to use the muscles. It's time maybe to use more the brain, because yes, we are very, very keen to be the first to arrive, which is extremely important, and the last to leave, which is also extremely important. But sometimes, and what I realized during my career as a volunteer, is also important the why we are doing this, why it's so important to advocate, to spread the message, and with simple action, just our colleagues just mentioned, but also to be more aware and more acquainted that it is not only not to lose or to put in a second as a secondary aspects how we are operational, and we're born on a battlefield. So timing is vital. Everything is very vital. But maybe it's time also to be more aware, to start to think and to intervene also in the dialogue, to be more engaged with the local administration, with the governments, and because sometimes we are, I feel, limited in this operational area, which and then our voice is not heard when it's time to make policies. So it's time to find the right balance in our organization without losing our expertise and our skills, but also to provide the volunteers or to recruit volunteers that are able to disseminate also these new aspects on the way we live in the community. So it's, and I have this challenge also as a president of a national society, which is very strong, responding to natural disaster, prone, but Italy is very prone to natural disaster, earthquakes, etc. So don't lose this aspect, because I want to be the first helping my brother, which is affected by a natural disaster. But on the other hand, I want that they understand the reason why they are doing and why we must be so well prepared. So, but again, thank you to all the panelists, because it's really very, very interesting. And again, maybe you have to forgive, because I come from Italy. So sometimes the offices of our politicians are not so well prepared. So I was so impressed that here it's true. This is we are not well engaged in my country in dealing. So sometimes we have to really push, and finding someone who is so prepared with these skills is something that is very encouraging. So that there is hope also in my country to do better. But no, thank you so much for.
Thank you. On that note, this is a perfect point to end the event. Francesco, thank you very much. This chapter has gathered the Federation, the Red Cross Center, as well as the city's office and emergency management, and has served, I think, one of the very important positions of the Red Cross, to convene, to be the house where volunteers gather, volunteers learn, but also policymakers learn about volunteerism and how the Red Cross contributes to the life of the city. But likewise, where the Red Cross learns also about what the challenges are and to benefit from your knowledge, your know-how, your data and your policies, and therefore the fusion from both of them can really benefit the lives of the most vulnerable in our city. So Josh, thank you for organizing the event. President Rocca, thank you for coming. Our Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Center, thank you for sharing what you know and sharing your expertise. And thank you also to the Mayor's Office and to the Emergency Management's Office for contributing to this knowledge. We hope that you appreciated this moment with our President and with the city, and we're looking forward to seeing you soon again.